Alright, my name is Sean Fallon and you're listening to episode 5, Breaking Bad. Welcome to From First to Last.
No one told you.
Baby, I hear the blues are calling, toss.
Hello again and welcome again. My name is Sean Fallon. This is From First to Last. My guest today, he's a writer, he's an editor, he's a cinema enthusiast, he's the real thing, he's even better than the real thing. He's David Damien Shreve Jr. Hello Dave, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm very good, mate. It's a bit early here and I'm sort of starting to get a little bit cold in Australia now, this early in the morning, so it's
Right.
I'm all sort of wrapped up and I've got a cup of tea and I'm doing it, but...
I'm a little disappointed that your introduction to me excluded The One Who Knocks. I think that would have been a good opportunity, but
See,
we'll get to
yeah,
that momentarily.
Yeah, so sometimes the inspiration comes, sometimes it doesn't. I've just got to, yeah. Based on that, what TV show did you pick?
Well, I actually picked Everybody Loves Raymond, but you thought it was a bit too early in your production to tackle something so meaty, and you were like, let's keep it to something simple. So, as a viable substitute, I considered, didn't consider. I have a shortage of options available to me, so from that shortage, I picked Breaking Bad.
Which is
I'll
a
go
great
ahead and
choice.
I'll go ahead and concede to your listeners that I'm probably the worst guest you'll ever have on this podcast just because I don't get TV at all. I finished maybe 2 shows in my lifetime.
Well, that's it. You don't have to have finished them, though. You can choose. You could have just chosen any show.
That's true.
And then just come in blind, just watch the first and last episode, and just go
Very
from
true.
there. I am
But
waiting for someone to be really brave and just pick a show they've never seen. And just
Oh,
go
that would
for
be
it.
neat. Do you think it would be a prerequisite there that they watch the whole show and discuss the first to last episode, or just blindly figure out what happened between chapter 1 and chapter 58?
I'd go blind. Just
Yeah.
like, let's just see what happens. And then it's
That would
just
be
sort of
nice.
like, we could speculate and you could just sort of think like, oh, how does it get from here to there? We'll see what happens. It might happen and it'll be like a 15-minute episode of just 2 people just sat there going, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think? And then it ends.
I still think that could be a great premise and a great little structure for you to figure out how. Like, I'm trying to think of a good show. Maybe like I just started the show Cheers, so
Okay.
I just restarted the show Cheers. I watched it when I was younger. If you start with episode 1 where Sam meets Diane and you end with where Sam and Diane are at the end, that leaves a whole lot of storytelling for you to fill in with imagination in between.
That's
That'd
it.
be a good example.
Okay, well maybe that can be your next episode.
But in all seriousness, I quit almost every TV show I've ever started. I quit Lost, I quit Hannibal, Homeland, Dexter, Mad Men, Daredevil, Arrow. I quit all those shows out of disinterest. I did not quit Breaking Bad. I think, for me, Breaking Bad represents the pinnacle of television storytelling. And since it was still on the board, I thought it would be a good opportunity for you and you as a great conversation partner to dive into it.
Okay, well, let me give you some numbers and then I'll ask you. So, Breaking Bad ran for 62 episodes and it premiered in January 2008 and finished September 2013. So what's your experience with Breaking Bad?
Well, so in 2008, when the show came out, buzz was pretty immediate, I think. The positive attention that Breaking Bad received, the critical praise, showered pretty quickly after that first season. I, being stubborn and indignant, avoided the show. I come from a backwoods community with a serious backwoods meth problem. And so I was kind of opposed to the principle of the idea of celebrating a hero born of meth dealing, which in retrospect is kind of dumb. Really dismisses and reduces what this show is constructed of. So it took me 3 seasons. I avoided the first 3 seasons. And a good friend of mine, a contributor to the website that you and I both contribute to, and my cousin, Scott Shreve, prodded and prodded, begged me to watch this show based on my love of film. And I gave in between seasons 3 and 4. So I binge watched seasons 1, 2, and 3. And when I say binge watched, I watched episode 1 and was caught up by the end of that week with all 3 seasons. I couldn't stop.
Okay, so it's
stop
quite funny actually because
watching.
I'm the same. I
Go ahead.
didn't really do it out of... Yeah, it was sort of out of stubbornness. If you, like, people who are listening, if you don't, like, know my bio, I was an English teacher in Thailand for a couple of years, and while I was there, that's when the show came out. I was in a bit of a TV drought at that point, because I couldn't really have access to TV except for like you could buy TV box sets on the night bazaar in Chiang Mai for like 10 baht or 100 baht. And so that's how I caught up with a lot of TV. I just buy these like knockoff box sets and then just blitz TV shows. But Breaking Bad, I only ever saw the cover of like the first season, and it was Hal from Malcolm in the Middle with a gun in his undies. And like I read the premise, and it was like a chemistry teacher falls on hard times and needs to cook meth to make money. And I just thought, this is just going to be dumb. This is just going to be dumb slapstick shite. And just completely wrote it off without doing any more research. And it wasn't until after I left Thailand, I moved to Korea. And I was living in a town called Icheon in South Korea. And one day I put on AV Club. And the headline, it was just like, the end of season 3. And the headline was like, with the finale of season 3, Breaking Bad establishes itself as like the best thing on TV. And I was like, I may have missed a trick here. So same thing, got hold of everything from 1 to 3, and then me and my wife were like, okay, well, we'll savor this and enjoy it and see what happens. And yeah, within a couple of weeks, all gone, just done.
It was impossible. I was making up reasons to like be late for work because I needed to watch one more episode the night before when it was available to me to stream through all of them. There would be a cliffhanger, and I would sit up in bed, and I would, WTF, what was that? I can't stop now. I'll just be an hour late for work in the morning and get this last episode in. I probably did that 4 times, to be honest, in streaming and binge watching those first 3 seasons.
I ended up like changing jobs and like moved shifts with my teaching thing, because I ended up working at like a teaching academy that was like a night school. So what me and my wife would do, like she was working mornings and I was working nights. So I'd watch it in the morning, she'd watch it in the night, and then when we'd meet up for dinner at the end, we'd sit there and then we'd like, we'd go over it then. Because we couldn't risk running out of time and not being able to watch it. So we had to just watch it in shifts and then work it out later.
Right.
I just remember that one thing was like the end of season 3, like we'd gotten to a point where we were like, oh no, we've binged this too much and it's so long till season 4 comes out. We've just got to just try and do like one on a Saturday for a couple of weeks. So the end of season 3, we sort of watched one and we were like, okay, we'll watch one more, and then we'll stop. We're like, okay. And it was about midnight on a Sunday night, like we both had work the next day. And then it was the episode where at the end, spoilers I guess, Walt Aztecs the 2 dudes. Like they're about, Jesse's about to go and he's got a gun, and then the next minute the Aztec just comes out.
Oh, that's one of my favorite moments in the show. Oh,
just
love that.
Takes the dude out, shoots the guy, and just goes to Jesse like, run. And I just remember that scene and that episode ended. My wife was like, go downstairs, buy snacks, come back. Let's just do this and let's just get it done. And then we just blitzed the rest of it. And it was like, there's no way we were sleeping on that.
That was such a pivotal moment in like the audience's perception of Heisenberg. I remember it being in bed in that moment. I was the same situation as you. It was 12:30 at night, and I was like, this is the last one I'm watching, at least for tonight. And people say it all the time, that it knocks you out of your chair or it makes you sit up. Like, I jumped out of my bed in that moment, and I was like, are you kidding me? This is where they're going to take, this is how far he's going to go. And then, of course, from there, it just escalates, and like, there's no limit, there's no ceiling to how much of a villain they'll make. I guess that's not really that villainous, but it shows the limits he'll go to protect himself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, up until that point, he's been sort of like a bit cagey about killing people, and it's been this big moral quandary. And then by that point, he's just like, nah, this is it now. It's, the full moon is out, and it's just he's gone full werewolf, and it's done. Like,
yeah, that was like the first moment of television that I think I've ever immediately fallen in love with. And it's also important in understanding that shifty father-son relationship between the two of them, because that's an act of protection. Like that's Walt stepping in to protect Jesse as a son, kind of.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, very much so. Okay, so you watched the first and the last episode in prep?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so what did you think of the first episode, sort of in a vacuum?
So, here's what's neat, and the thing that I kept thinking about when I was watching first and last episodes. So much happens in these 2 episodes for a show that is celebrated for both patience and concentration and the perfect pacing of story time. But each the first and the last episode could have been in 3 to 5 episodes with
Yeah.
everything that happens in them. Could have been 3 to 5 episodes in the middle. They're just such hurried beginning and endings. And the first episode is good. It's a great pilot. I probably wouldn't have watched the show if it wasn't, but it was a really good pilot. And someone could watch it and say, this must be a really good show.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it gives any indication that this show will hit what it hits in seasons 3, 4, and 5 in the first episode, having
No.
rewatched it.
Me and my wife have a rule with a new TV show, and it is called the Breaking Bad rule. And it's, if a show hasn't got us hooked by 3 episodes, we just dump it. Because based on, like, the 3rd episode of Breaking Bad, I think this is correct, I might be misremembering this, but the 3rd episode of Breaking Bad is when I believe he's got Crazy 8 locked up in the basement, and he bike locks him
Right.
to death. And that episode is just, absurdly good. And I think that's the first time you definitely get a hint that this is going to be something very, very special.
Right.
Whereas the first episode, like you say, super entertaining. Lots of stuff happens and it's a lot of pieces being put in place and stuff like that. But it would be easy to sort of watch that without knowing what's coming next and watch it and be like, oh, have they completely just burnt out all of their sort of goodness in one episode? Like, it's very much, you could perceive it as like, this is just a pilot that's just, okay, let's just cram a load of good stuff in here, and then once we've got them hooked, we'll work it out later. I agree with what you're saying there. You don't sort of look at that and think of future episodes like Ozymandias or Fly or what's the one with the train heist?
Dead Freight. That is my
Dead
favorite
Freight,
episode
yeah.
of television that's ever existed. In a vacuum, that is
Yeah.
a small cinematic achievement. I love that episode of TV.
So you don't really kind of... Because I will say, like, when I was talking to Austin about the X-Files, watching the pilot of the X-Files, you can, like me and him said, everything is completely set up and it stays that way. And you can watch the episode and you can sort of predict that, like, the good stuff that's going to come in the future, because that episode's so good. But, like, I think I agree with you there in the sense of the pilot. Like, you couldn't possibly watch that and imagine how good the show is going to get and how high those highs are going to be.
Right. I didn't remember what happened. I remembered all those things happening. I did not remember that it all happened in the first episode.
Same.
That it was a cancer diagnosis, that it was the ride along with Hank, and that it was the entirety of the first batch, Jesse going to his dealers and building the first trouble. In my mind, I had remembered all 4 of those things as separate episodes. I didn't remember it all fitting in the pilot.
Yeah, same. There was definitely scenes where I was like, oh, okay, is this, okay. I was quite, I'm the same, like, I was like, oh shit, this is the first episode, and this is where they're going, and this is how much they sort of, like, get all in. I mean, I think that opening, though, the cold open, where he's in the RV and the trousers fly away and all that, and he does the little video.
Great image.
Yeah, I mean, that just gets you... I feel like that just gets you straight away. And I think for me, it was quite telling... when he sort of does the confession and he walks out into the road? I think it's quite telling that he points the gun down the street towards the cops.
Right.
I think that is your first sort of indication that Walt is going to be... I feel like that sums Walt up so well that he would rather go, like, suicide by cop than kill
Suicide by
himself.
himself.
Yeah, he's sort of a coward, but at the same time, he wants to have the blaze of glory, but he knows he has... Yeah, I feel like that's very quickly Walt.
I think in those 7 minutes, we get everything that we need to know about Walt, in that he looks afraid. He seems uncertain, but in times of turmoil, he's always one step ahead of everybody, and that's when he throws the phosphorus in the pan and then fights. You're like, holy crap, he's inventive and intelligent even under duress. And then, like you said, shortly thereafter, it's like, in what direction will he point that inventiveness and intelligence? Because he points the gun forward instead of at himself, and it's like, oh wow, he's going to go out a villain. Yeah. Because I don't know, do you get an immediate sense? Because obviously the show is about the development of a villainous empire. Yeah. He very much is a bad guy by the end, but I can't recall exactly when I could tell that he was becoming that.
I think for a lot of people, I know, like, when I was talking to my brother about the show, and his point where he completely lost any sympathy for Walt was when he lets Jane die. Yeah. Like, I think that is, for a lot of people, that's when... Which is sort of a weird one, because at the same time, I remember when I watched that, and I was like, oh shit, this is really dark. But But at the same time, I am sort of thinking to myself, I was thinking to myself, well, she has got Jesse hooked on heroin. She is quite a toxic influence, but there's a
Right.
way, there are better ways to deal with it. I think my problem was I was always sympathetic to Walt all the way through.
Right,
to,
me too.
To
I had that
possibly
same
my
issue.
own detriment, like.
I was one of the people that hated Skylar until season 4. I admit I have to go back and fix that because I know now there's like a push against that whole mindset. But I was so angry that Skylar was always selfish in her motives and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, but wait a minute, I'm aligning with Walt. How can I
Yeah.
even accuse Skylar of being selfish?
Yeah, that's it. It's a hard one to defend.
Yeah. So I mean, the first episode plants all the seeds, but like you said, I don't think the hook comes for a couple of more episodes, and then I don't think that they really drive the nail in. For me, the device that really got me was Tuco. Once Tuco was introduced, like
Yeah.
I got addicted to that rush of anxiety that this show offered because Tuco was just, this lit collection of dynamite in every scene that he was in. I guess my first impression of that pilot is it's a damn good pilot, but there is no way anyone could watch the pilot and know the quality of television and storytelling that was going to be wrapped up by the end of the last season.
No, I mean, like you say, a lot of the ideas are there. Like the introduction to Jesse is very Jesse, you know what I mean? Falling out of a half-naked woman's window and all that.
Right.
And I think that whole thing of Walt being just like inventive and industrious, he is just like, there's a great line much later on where Jesse's talking to Hank and he's like, you don't understand, he's the devil. He's lucky and he's smart and he's in, it's just, because that is the constant thing. Like Walt is, like you say, always seemingly 10 steps behind everyone, but is actually 10 steps ahead of them. He's always, as you see, I mean, obviously in the last episode and in the first episode, you do see that of like, just having that, being the smartest person in the room and using that for villainy instead
Right.
of like for the betterment of mankind. He's using it to kill people and to enhance his own ego and his own empire.
And that's another thing that I think is that took me back a little bit is I think I read one time, wasn't Jesse supposed to die in season 1?
He was the writers' strike.
Right.
It was a combination of the writers' strike and Aaron Paul just being amazing. So
Yeah, and he is. We cannot go through the episode without pointing that out. That's another thing that I don't think the first episode, and maybe this is by design, but I don't think the first episode gives you any indication of how much you're going to go through with Jesse because he does feel expendable in that first episode.
yeah,
And in opposition to that, how much eventually you're going to sympathize with Hank because Hank is a douche in that first episode.
I have that in my notes. It's just literally says, how did we end up sympathetic towards? I actually got, how did we end up so sympathetic towards Hank and Jesse? Because I think from that first episode, you are positioned to be like, oh, poor Walt, and he's got cancer, and he hasn't got any money, and this and this and this. Oh, Hank's a complete piece of shit, and Jesse's some loser. How fascinating to find yourself by the end when so many people had like completely turned on Walt. And I remember watching episodes where my wife was just in tears of just how badly Jesse had been treated, and she was completely gutted when Hank gets killed. Like, how weird to rewatch this episode and how well. I mean, obviously, it's all there in the chemistry speech when it's like, it's the study of change, and that's what this show is, isn't it? I mean, the jump from first to last in terms of our opinion of the characters is incredible.
Every single person who was a major player in the meth conflict is inverted by the last season. And that's why I was thinking when I watched, like, wow, they did a really good job at saving this character. But then I'm like, but this whole show is such a complete and well thought product and clearly a 5-act play that was mapped from the beginning that I don't think they saved anything. I think it was by design that at first we thought of Hank the way that we thought of him, and as Jesse the way that we thought of him, and as Walt is the way that we thought of him. Because by the end of it, Jesse becomes Jesse is in the beginning his expendable jester, and Hank is his bully. But by the end of it, that's completely inverted. Like, Jesse's the hero of the story. Hank is the only guy that has a chance to bring down the villain that is Heisenberg. And Walt is 100% a villain.
Yeah.
That's a crazy thing to look back and map and realize when you go back and just think about the first episode and how it felt to watch it and what indication it gave you of those characters.
Yeah, it's, like you say, especially with Hank, it's incredible. And, I love to see just like a well put together, like a well written, it's just, yeah, like you say, all the pieces are there, and it just, because whenever you read like interviews with Vince Gilligan, and he talks about like his process and his writers and all that, some of the insights are amazing. Like there's a whole thing that they have of, and it's sort of like what the Coen brothers do as well, of purposely writing themselves into a corner. So and then they have to then spend weeks and weeks and weeks writing themselves back out. And like the example he always gives is there's an episode, I can't tell you which season it is. It's possibly the third, where Walt and Jesse are locked in the RV at the junkyard, and Hank's outside.
Right.
And apparently, like, they got up to that scene, like, they're all together and they're all pitching it and everything, and they got up to that scene, and then they were like, well, how do we get them out? And no one knew. And apparently they just tabled it for, like, 3 months, and would come back and say, well, what if they do this, and what if they do this? And Vince Gilligan was like, no, go bigger, go, weirder and all that. Because the idea was, when you watch that episode, you have them there, and then it goes to commercial break, and you've only got those, like, 7 minutes of ads to try and work it out.
Right.
But obviously they've had months and months and months to put it together. So when the episode comes back on, and obviously they do the thing where, Saul calls Hank and all that, it's like, oh God, I would never have thought of that. That's genius, and so on. And it's great, and it's so satisfying to watch that, to just like watch them pull themselves out of a corner they've put themselves in.
Yeah, and that's a completely transposed experience, because that 3 months of like confusion and desperation that they imposed upon themselves is, like you said, segmented it in like one small dose pill form for the viewer. And I remember that episode, and I remember thinking, holy hell, how is this going to pan out in Walt's favor? How is this not the end of the entire show?
Yeah, that's it. And you didn't even get the thing of like that being the cliffhanger at the end of the episode.
Right.
That was just a middle bit. You didn't even get like, oh, I'll have a week to work it out. It's like, no, you got 7 minutes, figure it out. And obviously, you just never could.
Yeah, and that's another thing I love about this show, is that it was so committed to just telling the story the way it should be, and not the way that the model of television dictated it had to be. When there was room for a cliffhanger, there was a cliffhanger. But say episode 7, I think, in the final season, after Hank figures it out on the toilet, we got a great cliffhanger. It's like, shit, now Hank knows, and now, because they're taking a mid-season break, we have to wait 6 months or a year for the reaction. And then we think, okay, next episode, what's Hank going to do? No, Hank and Walt are in the garage together talking about it 7 minutes later.
Yeah, I mean that's the genius, because like I remember the build up to that last season being like, oh, okay, so we're gonna have like a cat and mouse of like, oh, what does Walt know? What does Hank know? Like, no, fuck that. They're gonna have a conversation and explain to each other exactly what they know, and they're gonna go to war.
Yep.
It's completely not what you expected.
Yeah, I think Vince and his writing team are like so good at being true to their story, regardless of what viewer expectation asks them to do or expects them to do, and what the model of television, which is why I used to think of television as a lesser storytelling form, because perpetuity doesn't lend to arcs. But the arc here was concrete and traceable and certain from start to finish. And you're starting to see more of it now, I think. You're starting to see television lend more to arc instead of perpetuity, instead of getting you to watch or subscribe week to week. You're getting the storytelling as the product, just serialized in delivery instead of structure.
Yeah, that has been something I've been talking about, because other episodes that we've done of this so far, like obviously X-Files and Buffy were very much, there was an arc, but the arc was always in the background to week by week, monster of the week, crime of the week stories.
Right.
And then I feel like it was probably something more like Lost, or that sort of started to push it forward, in the sense of like, around about Lost, you start to get those stories, like those TV shows like Prison Break and stuff like that, where we've got, an overarching thing that we need to tell, and there might be little mini adventures along the way, but the story is now front and center.
Yeah, and you could still see it on the last, like I think right now their TV is considered to be in a great renaissance, and there was one of those recently with The Sopranos and The Wire, but even Sopranos and The Wire still kind of lent themselves to just get people from one week to the next at certain points of their stories. Yeah. But I think, like, you're right with Lost and now Breaking Bad, and we're seeing with other things now. We're even seeing bottled seasons of arc with great shows like Fargo is another TV show that I'm currently in love with.
True Detective.
Yeah, True Detective, all these, where they're saying we know what the story is and we're not going to let the model of delivery influence the story. I'm sure that has a lot to do with the fact that most people watch things in binge watching form now, and streaming is available, and so it becomes just an extended movie structure.
Yeah, no, that's true. Like, I think that has been like binge watching has been a bit of a subject that keeps coming up, and the idea of like, can you binge watch a show that is just crime of the week, monster of the week, beginning, middle, end? It's so
Right.
I feel like it's like sitting down and reading a book of short stories from beginning to end. You just don't really do it. You dip
Right.
in and out.
Yeah, you take a short story and you sit on it for a while and you process
Yeah.
it and then you return for the next one. So let me ask you this: when you watch, so you had the same experience as me. You caught up through season 3, and then season 4 and 5 you watched in the serialized weekly form.
Yeah.
How do you feel about experiencing the story those two separate ways? Did you prefer to have it available when you could get to it, or did you like that tantalizing lack of control that the serialization week by week structure forced you to experience?
I did. It's Breaking Bad was probably the last. Oh, well, I guess it isn't. It's one of the last shows where I've ever done that, where I've watched it week by week. Like, I will find that a lot of the time I will wait till a show ends and then just have it all in one place. Obviously, at the moment, Game of Thrones is one that I feel like, because of like spoiler culture and stuff like that, you've got to stay on it week by week.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. I do like everything all in one place, but there was that whole thing of Breaking Bad where it was almost like it was like a feast. Like, you had Breaking Bad and you watched it, and then you just spent a week just like with a full belly, just digesting, and me and my wife would always just like try, and because I think, like you say before, about not writing a formulaic story, because there are a lot of shows where you can watch an episode and you can spend that week just working out what's going to happen next,
Right.
just by following the rules. Like, oh, well, this foreshadows this, so this will be this and this. And by the time you do get to the next week, you've cracked it, and the episode is what you expected it to be. Whereas with Breaking Bad, I would always say, sort of like from experiences like trying to be a writer myself, and sort of saying like, oh, well, this foreshadows this and this and this and this, and then inevitably watch it and just be like, oh no, I'm completely wrong.
Right.
I'm trying to follow basic storytelling rules, whereas Vince Gilligan's just telling a story.
It is the best show to write if you're or to watch if you're trying to learn rules of writing and when to break them and when to use them.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better example to use. And I think he was very transparent about the writing process while the show aired most of the time. Like, he was not a reclusive artistic voice. Like, he liked talking about writing that show, which, I think would be a great resource for anybody looking to write, because you have what many people, I don't think that I'm reaching out of bounds when I say that Breaking Bad is the best show ever, because I think a lot of people think that.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And so you have this artifact of high critical success, high commercial success, and then that supplementary artifact of Vince Gilligan being open to talking about the entire process, how it worked, and what didn't. And I think that's an invaluable resource to anybody looking to be a storyteller of any form.
Yeah, there's some very good, again, AV Club. I think that, I don't know if they did it for 3 and 4, but what they would do is, like, Vince Gilligan came in and just went episode by episode, just telling like little anecdotes about the writing process and how they came to this idea and all that. And that's how I read the thing about the being trapped in the RV. And
Right.
stuff like that just fascinates me. Like, in William Goldman's Which Lie Did I Tell, he talks about the Coen brothers, and he says the same thing. Like, when they're writing, they will write themselves into a corner on one script and then just move on to another script and then do the same thing and then go back to the original one. And I think the story he tells is like, when they were writing Fargo, they got themselves to a certain point and then just didn't know where to go from there. So then they just went and started writing Big Lebowski. And then Big Lebowski got to a certain point and then they just went back to Fargo, and then they'd worked it out by that point, and so on. And it's like, first off, how amazing just to be like, oh, we can't finish Fargo, we'll just write Big Lebowski.
Yeah, we'll warm
Oh.
up with
Yeah.
the best movie ever just before we finish the best movie ever.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Basically.
That can't be bad. But yeah, I mean, that sort of idea of, rather than making the job easy for yourself, you're like, no, if I make it hard for me and I can crack it, then the audience will appreciate it. And I think you do. I think a lot of people, even if it's subconsciously, if the writing is there and it's smart and it gives you credit, it just gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling. And Breaking
Right.
Bad did that for me so much. Like, I could never predict what was going to happen, and I could never use my, the things I'd learned in creative writing courses to break it. And it just sort of said to me, the writing rules, there are no rules.
Right.
Write the story you want to write, and if you have to do it in a really roundabout, difficult way, your readers will appreciate it.
Right. Like, it's almost as if he hands over, he's like, here's the rules for writing. You can see that we followed it here, here, and here. But notice that the last rule is sometimes you got to break all these.
Yeah.
Like, essentially. Yeah, and I think that's a resource that Breaking Bad offered the world. And I also think, for me, just as a consumer of media and critical media, that it kind of changed the game on episode recaps too, because I think that's when episode recaps became like its own art form. Because I remember, like, I was so hungry to understand each episode more that I would read 4 or 5 on Monday. I would read 4 or 5 episode recaps, and people started to get so good at finding the details and stringing together the story and the references and the structure and the narrative fabric of Breaking Bad. And I think ever since then, like, now because you're recapping Game of Thrones, that there is an art form to it.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's very much like it would be great to read those those sort of articles afterwards. And I love stuff like that as well, like Easter eggs and stuff, and it would be like, oh well, this, when he says this or this action or this item of clothing is, harkens back to this thing, and you're like, oh yeah, that's so good. I love that. The work's been put in, the love is there, and they've put these little touches, and I love that stuff.
Yeah, and then a small example of that, this might be a rough transition, but is the Marty Robbins element of the final episode. They tell the story by putting something else in the story when they put the song El Paso into the final episode, which is a song about an outlaw who can't stay away from the woman he loves. And so that's what that tragic Western song is about, is the guy who commits a terrible, violent, and inexcusable act, escapes, but then comes back to check on his love.
Yeah.
And that's what the episode's called, Felina, in the song El Paso. Felina is the name of the Mexican singer that he fell in love with.
Right. And that's why Walt ends up stroking the massive meth vat at the end.
Right. And that's what I love about it, is that it both tells the story but completely misleads you, because if you take that on a surface level, if you take that cassette tape and Marty Robbins song, you think, oh, he's going to go back because he loves Skylar. No, it has nothing to do with the reason he goes back.
No.
His Felina is meth.
Yeah, and then the Empire. Well, okay, well then, that is a perfect seg. What do you think of the finale of Breaking Bad?
I think the finale of Breaking Bad is both perfect and yet one of the less impressive episodes of the season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. I mean, that final season does have Ozymandias in it, so you've always got that.
Well, it has Ozymandias and Dead Free. And the 2 episodes in the middle where Hank pieces together the puzzle. So that's 4 amazing episodes of television in one season.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is definitely perfect. Well, you tell me and then I'll tell you.
Okay. So I think it closes everything without long-winded epilogue.
Yeah.
It doesn't nullify anything that happens previously. Mm-hmm. And it takes the hero that you did not suspect to be the hero, and it allows him a singular moment to help us feel better about him after feeling so sad and sympathetic and like gut-wrenchingly upset about Jesse for 3 seasons. Letting him kill Todd in the way that he does is the most cathartic TV scene that I can recall in recent history.
Watching that last night, I just felt so good.
Yeah. It's 30 seconds long. I timed it.
Yeah. It's just so satisfying, because you're like, he could have shot him or something else, but that sort of thing of just getting... I mean, obviously it's incredibly violent and probably twisted. It's all very twisted, but that whole scene, you're just like, it's all coming out of Jesse. You're like, oh, this is it. It's all coming out in waves in this one action, and everything's going to be fine now,
Right. And, and so that's your last impression of Jesse, because Jesse has been a device that's just been used to torture viewers the whole time and to darkly paint Heisenberg and Walt, because everybody's so terrible to Jesse. And as we talked about earlier, we fully flip and we're sympathetic, and Jesse's the one we want to see the good thing happen to at the end. And it's so weird and strange and introspectively to realize that the good thing we're talking about is him strangling someone until their neck breaks. Like, that's the good thing. That's the release. And I timed it. I'm like, man, this goes on a really long time, and I don't want it to stop.
Yeah.
Like, 30 seconds of Jesse Plemons, the Todd, on the floor helplessly dying. And it's good for two. One, it gives Jesse the moment that he's deserved. Mm-hmm. But two, Todd sucks. Todd is the least likable villain in a show packed full of villains.
Yeah.
But
he's a great character, though. I think Jesse Plemons should be a huge movie star. He's just got that. I don't know. There's just something about him. Like when he came into Breaking Bad, it was incredible how, because obviously his big moment is Dead Freight when he kills the kid, and how well he's so, like, when he first comes in, he's just a bit dopey and he is what he is, and how quickly he's just revealed to be a baddie.
Right.
And how bad he then becomes, and you're like, oh shit, this took me by surprise, because Jesse Plemons is just like a big cuddly teddy bear, and then you're like, oh no, this guy he's really bad,
He's like
villain.
Matt Damon's husky, dumber younger brother.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is they utilize him in Fargo in the same way, except for sympathy. Like, he's the same character kind of in both. He's just a doof who does bad things. But narratively, they can structure him, and him through his acting too. I agree with you that he's an incredible actor. And I hear he was on The Wire and good too. I haven't seen The Wire.
Is he in The Wire?
I've heard that. Maybe I'm
He's
wrong.
on Friday Night Lights.
Yeah.
I think.
So
Future.
So seeing him die is a strange testament to just how committed Breaking Bad gets you to its storytelling.
Yeah.
Because I can't imagine any other show where an entire nation of people will be like, yeah, keep choking him until he dies. Like, clapping in their living rooms and applauding that. And it's like you said, it's a violent death. It's a harsh death. It doesn't blink. It doesn't look away. You see the life leave him, and it's tough.
I was watching it, and the moment that Jesse Plemons' neck snapped, I opened a beer.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, that's the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I juxtaposed that because I watched First and Last. I thought seeing this scene made me think back to a similar smaller dose of the same weird construction in the first scene, which is when Walt first goes Heisenberg, I think, and steps on the teenager's leg.
Yeah.
And I think both of those kind of have, in different measures, the same fabric, the same construct, in that it's a thing that you shouldn't feel good about seeing, but damn, it feels good to see it.
Yeah, no, very much. I mean, I think Breaking Bad is very much that, in the sense of, like, you shouldn't feel entertained watching a meth empire grow.
Right.
Because meth is evil. But at the same time, you do, like, when you see all the money and you see how well they're doing, you are like, you're cheering them on. You want them to succeed. But there is that interesting thing of, like, Breaking Bad. I guess it's not Breaking Bad's job to do this, but there was never a sense of, like, what meth does to communities or anything like that. It was always just the other side of that. It was always the people at the top looking down.
Right.
Which is, and again, these are the people you sort of sided with, and the show never really held up a mirror to you, and it was just like, okay, do what you want to do. That's up to you. We've got our own story to tell. If you want to find neck snapping and legs squashing and meth dealing entertaining, that's on you. You look at yourself.
You never get to see, like, the toothless 32-year-old woman who looks 95. Like, you don't get to see the bottom of it, and it's not really a celebration of meth. It's a show about empires and villainy and success in America and what it means, and by what means should success be obtained, and is there a difference between what Walt did and what his I can't remember his friend in college who took half of his fortune from the idea, and his woman, like, is there a difference between those two forms of success?
Yeah, I mean, it's all empire building, isn't it? It's all I mean, I think they do that very well, like, at the start of it was actually, in terms of, like, First to Last, it was very interesting to see, like, the first episode, like, after the credits, that opening scene of just, like, establishing Walt's piece of shit house. Mm-hmm. And he's on, like, the stupid Stairmaster, like, staring at his Nobel Prize thing, And then the start of the last episode where he's walking through the Swartz's house, and it's just, like, marble and big open spaces, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. And you do instantly get, like, watching the two episodes right next to each other, you do get that thing of, like, this is what Walt has, and his own ego lost him this. Like, he could have been married to Gretchen and had the big house and been the famous philanthropist. Philanthropist? Yeah. But instead, he lives in, the middle of nowhere, Albuquerque. He's on his stupid Stairmaster. He can't use the MasterCard. It's just...
Like, his birthday celebration is just a couple pieces of vegetable bacon.
Yeah.
Vegan bacon.
And,
in the beginning.
And it's good. I don't know if obviously that's intentional, but that was the first thing that just sort of occurred to me, just like that idea of Walt's ego has put him in a situation where he is in the house he could have had, and rather than living there, he's threatening the people who are there.
Yeah.
It's
like in full control of them. He wins.
Yeah, I mean that is a constant thing with Breaking Bad of who wins. Like at the end, me and my wife were talking like the final sort of scene with like Walt and Jesse, where like Jesse's got the gun and he won't kill Walt, and it's sort of like at the end, does Jesse win? Has Jesse won in the end? Like,
I think in the vacuum, I think so. I think him declining to kill Walt, which is the end that Walt was hoping for, was to be taken out by this son that he mistreated, because Walt kind of abandons both sons, right?
Yeah.
Like he has no. He doesn't even he doesn't say anything. He addresses everyone at the end except for Walt Jr.
Yeah.
He leaves Walt Jr. the fortune and hopes that Walt will do right by the family. I think he even says that to take care of his college education and his family.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do anything for him to save his position as his father. But Walt does try to save his position as father of Jesse, but Jesse's like, you're not my father.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Jesse's saying when the chance comes to kill him and Jesse throws the gun. Which, if you think about it, everything they went through in that season, Jesse risks dying there because there's nothing that suggests that Walt won't just kill him.
Yeah, that's it. He's like, it's not a thing of like, if you were Jesse and Walt shows up, you're not thinking he's come to rescue me. You're just thinking how bad things turned even worse. There's not a sense of like, oh, this is my compatriot who looks like shit and has shown up in the middle of nowhere. He's going to save me. You're like, oh, what fresh hell is this like?
Yeah. Jesse's been in a dungeon making meth, forced to make meth because of what Walt did, has no idea that Walt's cancer's back, has no idea that Walt's been shot, doesn't know that Walt's dying. He thinks all he knows is that the devil's back in the room with him. And instead of giving the devil what he wants, Jesse risks throwing the gun back to the devil to see what he'll do. Yeah. And I think that's lost a little bit, but that's how much Jesse hates Walt at the end of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's him winning.
Yeah, me too. And I think that's evident in the fact that the last time we see Jesse, I mean, it's a desperate, sad, teary-eyed, manic bipolar explosion of laughter. But Gilligan cuts the laugh mid-laugh. Like, he doesn't let him finish. He doesn't even let him start bringing the laugh down. That last image of Jesse is cut off in the middle, as if to say it's still going to, like, Jesse still has a distance to go, but he's going it.
Yeah, that's
it's still happening.
I think my favorite thing of the last episode, and it actually ties into a new theory I've developed about the first episode, is when Walt's talking to Skylar and says, I need to tell you why I did all this. And she's like, if I have to hear you say about your fat, and he confesses, like, I did it for me and so on and so on. One thing I noticed about the first episode, which had never occurred to me before, I thought he had the cancer diagnosis, then he saw the meth thing on TV, and then he went on the ride along. But he sees the meth thing on TV pre-cancer. And it's almost as if the show sort of, because you can see cogs turning, and because you know the kind of character Walt is, there's almost a sense that he has the meth idea before cancer, and cancer's just the tipping point. Like he
doesn't he ask before he knows that there's cancer? He asks how much that's worth. Right?
Yeah, so it's already there. Like, he's already started to have the idea.
Right.
And then the cancer's just the next step. And it's such an interesting thing. And knowing who Walt is and knowing what happens next, it's almost believable to think that he would have done it anyway.
Yeah, and you have to also think he gets a near perfect recipe on his first try.
Yeah.
You don't get that by just mixing ingredients you've heard go into it. Like, you have to wonder if Walt's even had the recipe for this. You have to believe that if you think outside of the vacuum of the story, that in that area, that people know that meth exists, that there is a meth issue, and that Walt knows that meth is a thing built from things that he's teaching children. And Walt has to know he has the ingredients. So you have to wonder if the recipe for the meth existed before all of this started. Like if Walt's always wanted an empire so bad that the idea has been there a very long time.
Which I could totally believe.
Yeah, I could too. Because I remember thinking the same thing this time. Like when, like you said, you noticed that Walt curiously peeks into meth, the meth kingdoms, before he knows he's dying.
Yeah, which is I think that's yeah, I think that's very good. Like it's open, they keep it open for interpretation. But yeah, that just straight away, as soon as he sort of goes, Hank, how much money is that? You're like, oh, you sneaky piece of shit, you knew what this was. You know, and then it's just like, oh, now I've got cancer. It just means I've got less time to make the meth empire I was already planning to make.
Yeah, because he doesn't really, like, a different TV show might maybe show the meth after the cancer, but if it doesn't, a different TV show would at least put a reminder after the meth diagnosis, but it doesn't really do that. It's sees the meth, finds out about the cancer, calls Hank.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like he was reminded of meth. Like, meth was right at the forefront of his brain the entire time.
Yeah. And I do think as well, like, because rewatching it last night, I was sort of I couldn't remember how Walt sort of recruited Jesse. But, I mean, it's such an absurd idea, the TV show in its own way of like, you know, and while saying that, obviously, it's been revealed, isn't it? There's been quite a few true stories that have come later of teachers actually doing this and stuff.
Yeah.
But I feel like because they just, there's a weirdness to how much sense it makes. And like, Walt recruiting Jesse and sort of blackmailing him a bit, I feel like they sort of get to a point like, oh, let's just do this really quickly, and then people won't ask questions, and then by that point they'll already be cooking meth, and it won't matter. Like they don't dwell on it. He just sort of shows up at his house and just recruits him quite quickly, and then they just get started. Where, like you say, there is that thing of the first episode before you watch it where you're like, okay, so in this episode he gets the cancer diagnosis, and the next episode he recruits Jesse, and the next and you're like, no, this is all one thing. It's all very snappy. It's just like, oh, okay, meth, cancer, recruit Jesse, RV, Crazy 8, and Emilio, end. You know, it's like, oh, okay, that's all one thing, all very quickly put together. So I think it just avoids any questions about stuff like that.
But I do think, like you pointed out, that they give the speech to sort of indicate that it's always been him, and that's the closing of his characterization, is that everything you thought in the beginning was wrong. Walt always wanted to be the villain.
Yeah.
He wanted to be the guy with the empire, and he would have done it by any sense, and he was addicted to it, and it was a need in his ego that always existed.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting to juxtapose the speech that he gives Skylar that concedes that with the speech that he gives the camera.
Yeah, very much so.
That at the end, because in the camera it's insincere. It's almost PR families. Like it's almost fake, the things that he's saying.
Yeah, I mean, and it also matches up with, like, I think it's Ozymandias where he calls Skylar and that he knows the phone's being tapped, and he sort of uses, he sort of tries to unincriminate her, doesn't he? You know, by saying, oh, you never supported me, you never wanted to be part of this. And again, like, that whole thing all ties together to the point where, like you say, is he talking into the camera being sincere, or is he trying to just secure his legacy as, like, being a good man who turned bad?
Right.
You know, or a good man who was forced into it.
Yeah, I think there's an element of selflessness to a degree in it. Like, I think sometimes he's being apologetic, because I think he probably does obviously love Skylar, but when he apologizes, I don't think he's apologizing for what he did. I think he's apologizing for let her fall in love with the guy he wasn't.
Yeah.
Because that's who she knew, and he knew all along that he was somebody who was going to do a big thing, and that everything that he lost was somebody else taking something from him, and someday he was going to one-up all of them.
Yeah, I mean, that is, it's so incredible how well they just sort of keep that at the forefront, this constant thing of Walt's ego and his persecution complex of, like, I could have been this, but you didn't support me, or you took this all away. And it all just falls apart every time he has a conversation with someone. You're just like, no, this was always you. You know, you always had these skills and you could have been a good person, but you were always just too stubborn and too much of a prick. And that's how you ended up in Albuquerque on a Stairmaster dressed in beige looking like Ned Flanders.
Isn't there even, like, an indication that his loss of the fortune from whatever their big scientific discovery wasn't that ego-based too? Like, he gave that up because the woman chose the other guy, right?
It's something like that, or it's like, I remember just being like a line from Gretchen where I think he had a falling out with her parents or something. Like he flips out during a holiday, or there's some sort of indication that like he's just been too stubborn. So he takes a payout, I think, from them, like some
Yeah.
tiny payout to like buy the house or whatever. But it is like a whole thing of, you can just imagine it though. Like, if you just took like his interactions with say Gus later on,
Right.
and use that as him and Elliot Schwartz. And just that idea of someone being better at something than him, and him just not being able to do it.
Even if it's not better, like I think even partnership is a thing he wants nothing to do with, because
Yeah.
he often comments on, like they even bring that back in the last episode when he uses that idea of partnership against Todd's uncle. I forget his name.
Jack.
Against Jack, he accuses Jack of having a partner. And
Yeah.
the idea of a partner to these kind of people, no, it doesn't fly. Like, I think he's always kind of offended. He wants Jesse to be the son, and he can't stand the idea of Jesse being the partner sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and you have that with Gale as well, because Gale isn't his partner. Gale worships him.
Yeah.
You know, and that's perfect. That's a perfect relationship with Walt. He's got this guy who will follow his orders, who thinks he's God and can
Right.
do the work, and that's fine. And obviously, then when Gale gets to a certain point where that's, you know, he's expendable, great. Just send your other not partner to shoot him in the face.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and again, that goes back to the trinkets of artifacts that are planted in the show, because that's Ozymandias said the whole point of that poem is about the ruined end of power lust.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
Eventually, your need to be the only one at the top is going to be also you'll get there, but you'll be destroyed by it too.
Yeah, that's it. Like, yeah, and it's how little Walt understands that. You know, once he's killed Gus, and he's like, I won. You know, that's
Yeah.
he thinks he's won, and that's it now, and he's got his empire. But it's I think it's Mike, isn't it? Where it's like, just because you kill Jesse James doesn't mean you are Jesse James, or something like
Right.
that. I think that season after he's killed Gus, when it sort of turns into every episode's like a heist movie.
Right.
I love that season where it's that idea that he's like, okay, I've killed Gus, I'm the big man now. And he's just not. You know, he makes all the money and all that, but Gus had so much control and knew what was going on, and Walt just can't relinquish that sort of thing of like, because obviously he wants the names for Mike, and he wants his employees, but Jesse and Jesse Plemons don't get along and all that. And it's like, yeah, Gus had this under control because he just wasn't Scarface, and he wasn't trying to be this thing. He just was it. Whereas Walt's play acting at being the kingpin, but can't un-Walt himself, if that makes any sense.
Right. That's spot on. I think because Gus is a perfect foil to what Walt thought he was becoming is completely, and what he ended up being is completely different. Gus represented, I think, what Walt thought he would be.
Yeah.
But Gus was able to be that by not being Walt.
Yeah, exactly. That was the whole thing. Like, that's Walt, just by definition, is his own downfall.
Right.
You know, his own ego and his... I mean, I think that is a great thing, again, about the last episode. Him just saying to Skylar, I did this for myself. Just that
Right.
ego sort of just falling away to just say, no, this is what I wanted. All my heroic things were for nothing. I just wanted to be the kingpin. I just wanted this empire, and I wanted to be a somebody. And just to finally admit that to himself, obviously far, far too late, is just, I think that's just a great piece of writing. Just an incredible... The Walt's arc sort of finishes there. You know, that's his sort of thing. From going from the first episode where he says to Jesse that he's awake. You know, that's why he wants to break bad, because he's awake now. And then to end it with just him saying, yeah, and I felt alive and it was great. But obviously he just couldn't do it. And I think that's just perfect.
And I think for Skylar too, I think I came around to
Yeah.
sympathizing with her later, but that is like, also we talk about how Todd dying is the cathartic thing we needed to see Jesse have. I think Skylar being relinquished of that responsibility and that idea that her husband was that she helped build a life with her husband that brought him to ruin.
Yeah.
She's excused of that by that. He was always a bad person, and she could have never ever given him anything to keep him from being what he was.
Yeah,
Like
that's
it's a relinquishment for her.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I mean, for me, I think as a finale, the last episode is perfect. And it was interesting the next day to see people complain that it was too perfect. You know, it's like, oh, everything just gets wrapped up in a neat little package. You're like, yeah, and that's great. Because that's what I wanted. I just wanted it to be like everyone got like a cathartic, satisfying ending, and then the show would be finished. And we just have this 5-season thing of just like, well, whenever, you know, if ever TV wanes, you can always just sit there and say, well, I've always got Breaking Bad, which I know is 62 episodes, quality, beginning to end.
So it's pretty neat that we went through all of that and mostly talking about narrative structure and writing and character building, and we don't even touch on the fact that it's a funny show.
Yeah.
So much humor in it, and that the cinematography is perfect, and that the editing is insane for a TV show.
Yeah. Oh, there's some fantastic cold opens where you just get like a weird sense of something, and then you know the cold open asks the question, and then the rest of the show answers it, and you're like, oh, okay, that's very, very nice. I like that.
Yeah. And yeah, I think I remember people complaining about it. I remember people complaining about certain elements of the last episode, the spring up Deus Ex machine gun at the end, like that contraption, like that's too easy of an out. And I'm like, that's easy outs have kind of been Walt's thing. The dude used a giant magnet to erase files in a way that would never work in real life. Like you have to give him those devices. Those things work. And he was saved by gimmickry. He was saved by interventionalist fortune. He was saved by a freaking plane crash at one point.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think it's the last episode is exactly what I hoped, what I needed, what I didn't know I needed it to be.
Yeah, I mean, and everything, like there is like just so many satisfying things, like when Lydia, you know, she's got that's where the ricin finally comes into play, and you're like, okay, because if you break that down, it's very weird that he would get the stuff into the packet and all that, but who cares? I feel like it doesn't matter. It's fine. Everyone wanted Lydia to come to an end one way or another, and the whole ricin thing to finally get a payoff is great.
Right. That's the stevia. The plugs that all the free advertising that stevia.
Yeah, that's it.
So,
but they were loving
and
that.
then at the end they're like, "Oh, look at Breaking Bad giving our product all this free props," and then at the end they're like, "Oh, nobody's gonna buy it now."
Oh, that's it. Now, great.
Yeah.
Now we're poison.
So yeah, it's good. It's an excellent show, excellent finale, really good pilot. But in the middle, there's so much good stuff. Like, I think that the format of your podcast allows us to say, look how good these two things are, and remember how good the middle was.
Yeah, I mean, there are some incredible. Like, I think, like you say, having Bryan Cranston as well. Like Bryan Cranston, whatever he does now, like this, I think will be his crowning achievement. Like,
oh yeah,
in terms of that level of. Because Bryan Cranston's definitely one of those few actors who can totally go to the heights of drama, like really drag you in and just break you. But at the same time, he can go, you know, he's such a funny guy and so slapsticky and so manic and genius. I mean, I remember reading a story about when they were writing Malcolm in the Middle, and at first, like. The challenge was, what can we make Bryan Cranston do? Like, what stupid thing can we make him do? And then after a while, the challenge became, okay, well, what can't he do? Okay, let's find his limitations. Like, okay, we're going to make him dance around a car park in a leotard on roller skates. No, just does it. Perfect. Okay, what if he does this? Perfect. You know, and he just had that thing of like, didn't matter what they asked him to do, he would be game to do it. And he would nail it. Like whatever crazy comedic mishap they wanted him to do, he was all over it. And it's amazing that they sort of Breaking Bad didn't forget that. And they still had the thing of like, we've got Bryan Cranston and he is very, very good at having a nervous breakdown on screen. So if we need to do that now and again, we can. And they did. I mean, an iconic image of the show is him throwing the pizza on the roof.
Right.
Which is just an incredible piece of like comedic cinema. And the idea that this is still the show about meth and he still kills people and all that, but they can just switch the tone and just be like, yeah, but we still got Bryan Cranston who's funny as fuck, so let's use that.
Yeah, there's so much. Like, I think the whole structure of the show like depended on him more than we can ever measure, and they picked the right guy. They picked the right pivot for tone. Like everything he did was exceptional. I think he eventually won. He won the Emmy eventually for Best Actor, right?
Yeah, he won it.
Win multiple.
He won it 3 times on the run.
Yeah,
so he won it for first, second, and third. And I think when he won it for third, him and Aaron Paul both won it. Or like,
Oh yeah, that's right.
And then
And that was the first time Aaron Paul won, right?
Yeah. And I think Aaron Paul won it a couple more times, and Skylar as well. She won one.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because one thing like Bryan Cranston, he's one of those actors where obviously he's incredible and the range is crazy, but I don't think Hollywood has quite worked out what to do with him.
Right.
You know, I think when I was seeing like trailers for like Trumbo, I was like, yeah, I get it, but I feel like I feel like there's a better way to use him some way. I haven't worked it out yet, and obviously they haven't either. But yeah, it's an interesting one to have someone who's so talented, and you just need. I just feel like they need to find a way to use him. I want to see him in movies. I want to see him all the time because he's just such an ace guy.
Yeah.
You know, in real life, he just comes across as like a really top bloke, and you're like, yeah, I want him to have all the success in the world, and Aaron Paul.
He'd be a great spokesperson for Hollywood if Hollywood could figure out a way to get him on the stage more.
Yeah, that's it. But we'll see.
Yeah.
So I think definitely we can agree. I mean, Breaking Bad is the study of change, and from first to last, even maybe more so than like when you have shows that have completely almost changed genre from the first to the last episode, like Twin Peaks or Lost or Fringe or one of them. I think really Breaking Bad is probably the show with the most change from beginning to end. Like, even if the show had gone into outer space by the last episode, the characters crucially have changed so dramatically. And not only that, I feel like as a viewer, it's changed you. You know, watching that first episode and being like, oh God, yeah, when I watched this, and you kind of go through each character one by one, you're like, oh, I hated Hank, Jesse was crap, Skylar was this, Maria, you know, and you go through each episode, and chances are by the last episode, you're like, oh yeah, but Hank was, you know, and you've completely reassessed every single character in a totally organic way. Like, no character just changes from episode to episode. You've watched that gradual shift from goodie to baddie, or from victim to hero, or so on and so on. And it's just been that slow bleed out of just very, very good writing and very, very good story and very, very good acting that's got you from first to last.
I don't even want to say anything now. You just hit that so perfectly.
That was really good, wasn't it? That just came out of nowhere.
It was good. You should just cut the show right there.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, quick, stop. So, yeah, anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered enough, and there's no way that I can prepend on the point that you just made.
Fantastic. Okay.
Or append. Excuse me.
So, Dave, where can people find you?
I am, well, on our website that you and I share and run together as a collective team, audienceseverywhere.net. Also, at We Talk Movies, one word on Twitter, We Talk Movies. And me personally on Twitter, I am at David_Shreve2, but I don't ever say anything sincere on Twitter, so don't jump on Twitter with the goal of having a serious investigative debate with me about film, but I'll be happy to entertain other people's.
Go on Twitter and ask Dave about his opinions of both The End of September and Eddie Redmayne, and just see how that goes for you. That's pretty entertaining. I am this podcast is at From First to Last Pod, and you can email me at fromfirsttolastpodcast@gmail.com if you want a guest. There are still a million shows up for grabs, and we've only got about, well, I guess it's about 10 or 15 that have been bagsied, but there's still a ridiculous amount of shows. You can obviously find, like Dave says, my writing at audienceseverywhere.net. Other than that, thank you for coming on, Dave.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm really excited about this show, both the episodes that exist and are going forward, everything. I like this a lot.
Yeah, I feel like it's working pretty well so far. We'll definitely see how it goes.
And maybe in the future, if no one else grabs it, I'll come back and we'll discuss Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yes, definitely, which I've never seen a single episode of.
You haven't?
No.
Oh, I'm not. It's not an ironic love that I have for Everybody Loves Raymond. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time.
Oh, okay, well then, yeah, you can have bagsies on that. So if you're listening, anyone else who's listening, you can't do it. You can't do Everyone Loves Raymond now.
Did you feel that wave of disappointment that just went over the
Yeah,
globe?
you could just hear it. Just all the trees outside my window just swayed and screamed. Okay, so my name has been Sean Fallon. This has been From First to Last. Goodbye.
Nail off this little bit of